We've been in this sermon series called Signs. We've been talking about different road signs that we encounter or different things that we experience in life that feels like a road sign. And we've talked about crossroads, coming to a decision-making point in life and making good, healthy decisions that change our life for the better. We've talked about railroad crossings and sometimes those intersections that feel dangerous to us, or those situations that feel like we can't let go of control or cross over that space. We've talked about signs that say something like danger, landmines ahead. We've talked about the disciples saying, keep out, or hindering the children from coming to Jesus, and Jesus saying, don't hinder people, but welcome them. Today we're going to talk about how we build bridges. We're going to talk about bridges under construction. And I have to say, it's very appropriate that I just get back from this trip to Canada fishing, and it was 12-hour journey just traveling up to Red Lake, Ontario, and then flying another couple hours from there. And during that trip, let's just say I think we ran into 3 bridges under construction. And, you have to come into a stop and you wait for one side to come across and you go drive across. If you live here in Johnston, you've had your own issues with bridges under construction the last few years. Beaver Avenue's been totally closed going south, as well as now Ankeny. We've had that construction that's gone on for a couple years. I think we've been constantly living under this sign of bridges under construction. Now, what's the purpose of a bridge anyway? Why would we build a bridge? To make cars go on it. Maybe to get, it's like the chicken, right? To get to the other side. Maybe we make bridges so we can get to the other side, or so that we can connect with someone over there, or so we can get to a place that we previously could not get to, that were previously inaccessible to us. If you actually research human history, you find out that throughout history we've been constantly making buildings. We've been making certain things. And most of humanity, we either focus on building walls or bridges. Walls keep people out. Bridges allow access back and forth. And the truth is, which is easier to build? Structurally, which is easier to build, a wall or a bridge? Everybody's going, duh, why'd you ask that question? Because I thought maybe I could get you to respond to me. That's why. Okay. It's much easier to build a wall. I mean, you start with the foundation, you start building it up. With a bridge, you've got to figure out the span, and you've got to figure out where in the world you're going to get support, where there's not support underneath it. And you've got to figure out, is this a suspension bridge, or what kind of bridge can we build that's actually going to be able to move people from one space to the next? How much weight can it hold before it breaks under the strain? Bridge building is actually an engineering, you could call it a nightmare, or you could call it like a dream. And the fact is, actually, if we look at the Brooklyn Bridge, in 1863, it was a miracle bridge. It was considered a miracle bridge. It was created and designed by a man named John Roebling. And during his time, people, when he came up with this idea, people said, you can't build this bridge. It's impossible. It is a feat that will absolutely fall apart. In fact, it's twice as long as any suspension bridge at this point. We know that this will not work. He began by facing doubters. He began by facing people who said this is absolutely impossible. But he wouldn't give up on it. It was his dream, and he wanted to connect these two spans, and so he focused on it. He brought his son, Washington, into the process and the construction with him early. However, here's the tragedy. At the beginning of the process, John died due to injuries on the job. And his son was wounded, was injured so bad that he was left unable to move and unable to speak. But all he could do was tap a finger. And everybody was convinced that this bridge would not be built, that this bridge was just doomed and never would be constructed. And yet his son Washington was so impassioned with the idea of creating this bridge that his father dreamed of that he would not give up. And he had an apartment that was able to look out over the Brooklyn, where the Brooklyn Bridge would be, and he was able to oversee the construction, and he developed a pattern of a code that he could tap to his wife that would give the instruction on how to build or how to construct and what needed to be done. And 13 years later, that bridge was built, was completed, and his wife Emily was the first one to walk across it. See, sometimes big bridges are assumed to be impossible. Sometimes bridges are given up on because they seem impossible. Sometimes the people with the vision fall away and it's left to somebody else. Oh, but it takes determination and commitment to finish building a bridge. In this passage, we find Jesus. We encounter Jesus in a simple space where we think maybe basically Jesus is simply asking for a glass of water. Hey, I'm thirsty after this long journey. Give me a glass of water. And we encounter this Samaritan woman. She's minding her own business, doing her own daily chores. We might just think it's a simple transaction, but Scripture gives us 40-some verses to pay attention to what's happening here. And it's that important. Before I start talking about bridges, let's talk about the wall. Because whether or not there was an actual wall between Jerusalem and Samaria or not, there wasn't. But there was a wall. There was something taking place that would not allow the two people to commingle. See, for the Israelites in Jerusalem, they saw all these Samaritans as outcasts. They saw them as unwanted, as half-breeds. They had married somebody outside of the clan, and they were dirty, cast outside, and unwelcome. In fact, these Samaritans weren't even welcome in the city of Jerusalem during feast days to offer sacrifices. They weren't welcome at all. And it's pretty clear when Jesus comes back, when his disciples come back, and they encounter Jesus talking to this woman. And what's their reaction? Their reaction to see Jesus talking to this Samaritan woman is like, oh! They marveled. They were shocked. They were surprised. They were almost scandalized that Jesus is talking to this Samaritan woman. Now, let me put it in context, because the reason is because during that day, there are many religious leaders of the Jewish community that would have walked days around this community to avoid contact with the Samaritans. And Jesus is talking not only to a Samaritan, but to a Samaritan woman. There may not have been a wall, but there was a barrier. I think Jesus did this on purpose. I think Jesus, he could have gone into the community. He could have found an elder in the community. He could have spoken to someone who was a religious leader, even though they were Samaritans and outsiders. He could have found someone who was in authority, and yet Jesus sat at the well. And he met a woman who knew right away that she asked, what are you doing talking to me, a Samaritan woman? She knew that culturally that was a barrier in their day. She was astounded that Jesus would care enough to talk to her. So Jesus not only goes to a Samaritan, but he goes to a Samaritan woman. And then we find out even more so that her story is very confusing. Her story is that she has had 5 husbands. Now, we don't know if each of those have died and passed away and she's been handed on to another husband or not. We don't know what her current situation is, but he says that the one she's with at the current time is not even her husband. Maybe he's just caring for her. Maybe he's overseeing and providing for her in a way, but he's not her husband. We don't know her full story, but we do know that Jesus made a point of associating with a Samaritan woman. And I think he did it on purpose. Because Jesus was demonstrating that we should not have these walls in our life. We shouldn't have barriers between us and other people. We should be about building bridges. Jesus is demonstrating what it means to build a bridge to someone who feels so far removed from us, someone who doesn't feel worthy or welcome. Jesus is demonstrating a bridge of unconditional love and acceptance. A bridge that reminds us that regardless of race or creed or sex or sin or language or continent, that we are all a part of God's kingdom, and Jesus meets every single one of us at the well, giving us living water, knowing our faults, knowing our failures, and providing for us in every way. Now, let me clarify. If you think that there's a wall between you and Jesus, you're wrong. Let me clarify. If you think that you've done something that keeps Jesus from a relationship with you, you're wrong. Because Jesus demonstrates here very clearly that he goes out of his way to places that the culture says is not acceptable and says, I love you and I offer living water. I believe Jesus taught his disciples a lesson here that we cannot miss. We must be that bridge, that extension of God's love to all people, to the least and the lost, to the broken and the battered, to the sinful, the shattered, the outcast, the outsider, the man, the woman, the married, the single, the faithful, the unfaithful, the resident, the alien, the young, the old, the sexually abstinent, and even the sexually diverse. God's love is not closed off or shut down or relegated for a select few, but Jesus goes to even those that his culture would have said was not worthy. By the way, there's different kinds of bridges, aren't there? Have you ever gone across a toll bridge? It costs money to actually go across it. Yeah, and you roll your eyes. Why did I pay for that? I could have gone around the other way. And this bridge that Jesus is creating is not a toll bridge. It doesn't cost us anything. And in fact, it's not a measure of, hey, you're worthy of crossing this bridge. No, it's a free gift that everyone can walk across, that everyone can receive the same gift. But let's be honest. A bridge takes hard work. A bridge is hard to build. A bridge is constantly under construction or reconstruction. It's constantly finding ways to reach further or extend more or include more. In fact, even the Brooklyn Bridge, if you look at it now after it's done a little bit of reconstruction, refurbishing, they even put a layer in up above that allows for pedestrians and bikers to walk across, right? Bridges should always be about construction and building ways for people to be included. By the way, when you're building a bridge, you're often going to have those experts who tell you it's not possible, it's not feasible, or some people shouldn't be included, or you can't reach that destination with this bridge. And when it comes to the church, there's times you're going to find people say, well, that's not feasible, you can't include. You're going to find some people who say that's too great of a cost. It's going to take too much work. It may take someone to translate or to slowly tap out the message to communicate what that bridge looks like. It may take more than 13 years. But every bridge to include someone or to get to another place should be built. Every wall should be broken down. Every effort should be made to include and not exclude. Jesus is the living water, and we are to be the bridge. See, Jesus taught his disciples to be the bridge, but here's the good news. It doesn't stop there, because as soon as Jesus encountered the Samaritan woman, we find that this woman embraces the message, and then all of a sudden she goes and her life is transformed, and she goes to her community and she tells everybody else about it, and she becomes the very bridge that Jesus was creating, of saying, look, there's good news. And it's not about the fact that we have to go to Jerusalem. We're not welcome in Jerusalem. It's about Jesus gives us living water right here, that we can worship God in spirit and in truth right here. My challenge for you today is this. I want you to think about a person or a people group or a coworker, someone that you felt was unworthy or unwelcome, unwanted, dirty, sinful, an outcast. I want you to think about what Jesus would do. I I want you to think about how Jesus might be a bridge to that person to give the living water, or how Jesus might want to use you to be the bridge to reach out to offer inclusion and welcome in the name of God. I want you to pray about how you can reach out and invite others to hear the good news, to participate in small groups, to come and worship, to sing, to be a part of a community where we can gather and support each other and even fix tires. Because that is what the kingdom of God is about. It's not about building walls, it's about building bridges and bringing people together to hear the good news of Jesus Christ.